The moment I felt Evan's small fingers dig into my wrist like claws, I knew something was wrong. We were standing at Gate B12 in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, watching my wife Clarissa's plane taxi away from the terminal. She'd been planning this church retreat in Memphis for months, talking about the fellowship and the guest speakers. I was already missing her gentle laugh, the way she hummed old hymns while making coffee in the morning. But my 7-year-old grandson wasn't watching the plane. His whole body trembled against my side, and when I looked down, his brown eyes were wide with a fear I hadn't seen since we buried his daddy 2 years back. Cancer took my son Marcus when Evan was just 5, and Clarissa and I had been raising the boy ever since. "Grandpa," Evan whispered, his voice so quiet I almost missed it over the airport noise. "We have to go. Right now." I bent down to his level, studying his face. Evan wasn't a dramatic child. Never made up stories or threw tantrums. When he spoke with that kind of urgency, adults listened. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked, my voice cracking more than I intended. He leaned close, his breath shaky against my ear. "She's gone. We must leave." For a second, I thought he was talking about Clarissa's departure, maybe having some kind of delayed reaction to watching another parent figure leave, even temporarily. But then I saw what he was clutching in his other hand. A folded piece of paper, the edges crumpled from his tight grip. The writing was in red ink. Not the cheerful red of a child's crayon, but something darker, more urgent. The kind of red that made my stomach clench with recognition from my army days in Vietnam. For words were scrawled across the paper in harsh, angry strokes. "Leave before they come." My pulse hammered in my ears. The crowded terminal suddenly felt too small, too exposed. I grabbed Evan's hand and started walking toward the parking deck, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Who wrote this note? How did Evan get it? And what exactly was coming for us? I pressed the unlock button on my key fob as we approached my old Buick, but the electronic chirp was drowned out by the low rumble of an engine. A black sedan rolled slowly past our row, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. No license plate I could read from this distance. The car moved with deliberate purpose, not like someone searching for a parking space. More like someone who already knew exactly where they were going. I pulled Evan behind me, shielding him with my body as the sedan completed its slow circuit and disappeared around the corner. Every instinct I developed in Southeast Asia 45 years ago was screaming danger. The way the car moved, the timing of that note, the genuine terror in my grandson's eyes. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't an old man jumping at shadows. Something was hunting us. I helped Evan into the passenger seat, my hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of the black sedan in my rearview mirror, idling 2 rows over. Waiting. "Grandpa, are we in trouble?" Evan asked, his small voice cutting through my thoughts. I looked at my grandson, his face so much like his father's at that age, trusting me to keep him safe. The paper in his hand proved someone had gotten close enough to him to deliver a warning. Close enough to threaten the most important thing in my world. "No, baby," I said, backing out of the parking space with forced calm. "But we're going to take a little drive, okay? Just to be safe." As we drove toward the exit, the black sedan fell into position behind us, maintaining a careful distance. Not too close to seem obvious, not too far to lose us in Atlanta traffic. I thought about Clarissa, somewhere over Tennessee by now, believing she was heading to a peaceful weekend of prayer and fellowship. She had no idea that her husband and grandson were being watched, followed, marked for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. The weight of that folded paper seemed to burn through Evan's small fingers. Whatever message it carried, whatever warning it represented, had been set in motion the exact moment Clarissa's flight lifted off. That couldn't be coincidence. As we merged onto the interstate, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the asphalt, I made a silent promise to my grandson and my absent wife. Whatever was hunting us, whoever wanted us gone, They'd have to go through a 73-year-old man who'd learned a thing or two about protecting what mattered. Something was hunting us, and it had been set in motion the moment Clarissa's flight took off. I drove without a plan, only instinct. The black sedan stayed with us as we wove through afternoon traffic on 85, never getting close enough to read the plates, never falling far enough back to lose sight of us. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to hurt. Evan sat silent in the passenger seat, still clutching that red-inked note. At the first red light, I reached over and gently took it from him. "Can I see this, baby?" He let go reluctantly, like he'd been ordered to guard it with his life. I unfolded the paper carefully, and my blood went cold. On the back, in the same harsh red strokes, were 4 more words that hit me like a punch to the gut. "Trust no one. Not even family." My throat went dry. Family. The word that had always been my anchor, my foundation, now twisted into something dangerous. I thought about my oldest daughter, Lorraine, who'd been asking too many questions lately about my pension, my savings account, when Clarissa and I planned to update our will. I chalked it up to natural concern for aging parents, but now those conversations felt different. Calculated. I thought about my brother Leonard, who'd vanished 20 years ago after some business deal went bad, only to show up at Thanksgiving dinner last year like nothing had happened. He'd been full of questions too. Where did we bank? Did we have any investments? How often did Clarissa travel? The light turned green, and I pressed the gas pedal harder than necessary. In the rearview mirror, the black sedan matched my speed perfectly. "Grandpa, you're scaring me," Evan said quietly. I forced my shoulders to relax, tried to soften my expression. "Just being careful, baby. That's all." But my mind was racing backward, connecting dots I'd been too trusting to see before. 6 months ago, I'd come home from the grocery store to find my study door open. Papers scattered across my desk, drawers not quite closed all the way. Nothing seemed stolen, so I'd blamed myself for being careless. Now I realized someone had been searching for something. Bank statements, insurance policies, anything that would tell them how much a 73-year-old retiree and his church-going wife might be worth. The black sedan took the same exit we did when I turned toward Decatur. No coincidence there. I pulled into a dusty diner parking lot, killed the engine, and really looked at my grandson for the first time since this nightmare started. Evan's face was pale, but his jaw was set with determination that reminded me powerfully of his father. "Tell me exactly what happened at the airport," I said gently. "When someone gave you that note." Evan took a shaky breath. "When you were hugging Grandma goodbye, a man came up to me. He was wearing a suit and he smiled, but his eyes were mean. He said if I didn't give you that paper right after Grandma's plane left, we'd never see her again." Ice formed in my stomach. This wasn't random. Someone had been watching us, timing this perfectly. They knew Clarissa's flight schedule, knew I'd be distracted saying goodbye, knew exactly when to approach a frightened 7-year-old with their message. "Did you recognize the man?" I asked. Evan shook his head. But he knew my name. He said, "Evan, your grandpa needs to see this." Like he'd been watching us for a long time. Through the diner's windows, I spotted the black sedan pulling into the far corner of the lot. The engine stayed running. I stared at that note again, at those blood-red words warning me not to trust family. Whoever wrote this knew things only blood relatives would know. They knew Clarissa's travel schedule, knew where to find Evan and me, knew exactly how to get to us when we were most vulnerable. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about money or random crime. This was personal. This was family turning against family, and they'd waited until Clarissa was 30,000 feet in the air and unreachable to make their move. My knuckles went white around the steering wheel as the truth crystallized. Someone in my own bloodline had marked us for destruction, and they'd used my wife's absence to spring their trap. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated what an old soldier would do to protect his grandson. The diner felt like stepping back in time. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, the smell of coffee that had been brewing since morning. I chose a corner booth where I could watch both the entrance and the parking lot through grimy windows. The black sedan sat motionless in the far corner, engine still running. Evan slid into the booth across from me, his small hands folded on the Formica table. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with gray roots showing through her dyed blonde hair, poured coffee without being asked and left a kid's menu for Evan. "You hungry, baby?" I asked, though my own stomach was too twisted to think about food. He shook his head. "Grandpa, I need to tell you something else." The way he said it made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. There was weight in those words, the kind of burden no 7-year-old should have to carry. "What is it?" Evan glanced around the diner, making sure no one was listening. An old man in overalls sat at the counter reading a newspaper. A trucker nursed pie and coffee in the booth by the window. Nobody paying us any attention. "The man at the airport," Evan whispered. "He didn't just give me the note." My heart started hammering again. "What else happened?" "He told me things. About Grandma, about why she really went on that trip." Evan's voice got even quieter. "He said if I didn't give you that paper the second Grandma's plane left, they'd make sure we never saw her again. Ever." The words hit me like ice water. This wasn't some random threat. Someone had studied us, learned our routines, figured out exactly when Clarissa would be most vulnerable. "What else did he say?" I managed. Evan reached into his backpack, the small blue one with cartoon characters that Clarissa had bought him for school. Instead of pulling out coloring books or toys, he carefully extracted something that made my blood freeze. A flash drive. Small, black, wrapped in layers of clear tape. "Grandma gave me this 3 weeks ago," he said, placing it on the table between us like it might explode. "She said if anything ever happened, if strange men started asking questions or following us, I should keep this safe and give it to you." My vision blurred for a moment. Clarissa. My sweet, church-going wife who made the best peach cobbler in Stone Mountain and never raised her voice above a whisper. She'd known this was coming. "What did she tell you about it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "She said it had the truth about Uncle Leonard. About what he did to our family a long time ago." Evan's eyes were too old for his face. "She said some people would try to hurt us to get it, but that you'd know what to do." Uncle Leonard. My brother who disappeared 20 years ago after his construction business collapsed, leaving a trail of angry creditors and broken contracts. The same Leonard who'd shown up at Thanksgiving acting like nothing had happened, asking innocent questions about our finances. I stared at that flash drive, understanding beginning to dawn like a cold sunrise. Clarissa hadn't gone to Memphis for a church retreat. She'd left because she knew something was about to happen, and she'd needed Evan and me out of harm's way when it did. But it had gone wrong somehow. Instead of protecting us, her absence had triggered whatever trap these people had been setting. "The man said one more thing," Evan continued, his small voice barely audible over the diner's humming air conditioner. "He said Grandma made a mistake thinking she could protect us by leaving. He said now they had to clean up her mess." Through the window, I watched a second car pull into the lot. Another sedan, this one dark blue. 2 men got out, both wearing suits despite the Georgia heat. They didn't look toward the diner, but they positioned themselves where they could see every exit. I slipped the flash drive into my shirt pocket, feeling its weight like a lead bullet against my chest. Whatever information Clarissa had hidden on that tiny piece of technology, people were willing to kill for it. This wasn't just about me being cautious anymore. This was about survival. I paid the check in cash and led Evan out the diner's back exit, avoiding the 2 men in suits who were now leaning against their blue sedan like they had all day to wait. We walked 3 blocks before I felt safe enough to duck into a 24-hour laundromat that smelled like detergent and desperation. The place was empty except for an elderly woman folding towels in the corner. I found a table near the back, pulled out my old laptop from the car, and stared at that flash drive like it might bite me. "You sure Grandma said to give this to me?" I asked Evan one more time. He nodded. "She said you'd know what to do with it. She said you were the only one she trusted." My hands shook slightly as I inserted the drive into the USB port. The screen filled with folders labeled with dates going back to 1986. Bank records, property deeds, legal documents. Stuff that would put most people to sleep, but I'd spent 30 years working for the county assessor's office. I knew how to read land transfers and financial statements. What I found made my stomach drop to my shoes. Leonard hadn't just gone bankrupt 20 years ago. He'd been running a con game that stretched back to when our daddy died in 1986. Shell companies with names like Atlanta Property Holdings, Georgia Land Trust, Southeast Development Corporation. All fake. All designed to move money and property around like a shell game. But it wasn't just any property. It was our family land. The documents showed Leonard had somehow gotten power of attorney over Daddy's estate after the funeral. While I was grieving, while I was trying to keep food on the table for my young family, my own brother was stealing everything our grandfather had built. 40 acres in Decatur that Granddaddy bought in 1923 when black folks could barely own property in Georgia. The land our daddy had planned to pass down to his sons. Leonard had transferred it all into fake trusts, then sold it to developers for millions. "Grandpa, what's wrong?" Evan asked. "You look sick." I was sick. Sick with rage and betrayal that went so deep it felt like poison in my veins. But there was more. A folder labeled Insurance Claims contained documents showing Leonard had taken out life insurance policies on family members without their knowledge, including me and Clarissa. My brother hadn't just stolen our inheritance. He'd been planning to cash in on our deaths. The laptop screen blurred as tears of fury filled my eyes. Leonard had destroyed our family's legacy, stolen our children's birthright, and now he was back to finish what he'd started. That's why he'd shown up at Thanksgiving. Not for family reunion, but for final collection. Then I found the folder that changed everything. It was labeled Daddy's Warning and contained a single scanned document that made my heart stop. An affidavit, signed and notarized, dated 3 days before our father died. In his careful handwriting, the same script that had signed my report cards and birthday cards, he'd written a statement that laid out everything. I, Roosevelt Calhoun, being of sound mind and body, do hereby state that my son Leonard Calhoun has been pressuring me to sign over property deeds and financial accounts to his control. He has threatened to put me in a nursing home if I refuse. I fear for my safety and the safety of my family. If anything happens to me, Leonard should be the first person investigated. My father had known. 3 days before his heart attack, he'd known Leonard was dangerous and had tried to warn us. But we'd been too buried in grief to find this document, too trusting to imagine our own blood could be so evil. At the bottom of the affidavit was a note in different handwriting. Found this in Daddy's safe deposit box in 1998. Kept it hidden all these years. If you're reading this, it means Leonard is back and we're in danger. Clarissa, my wife, my sweet, gentle wife, had been carrying this burden for 25 years, protecting me from the truth about my brother because she knew it would destroy me. She'd watched Leonard charm his way back into our lives at Thanksgiving, knowing exactly what kind of snake he really was. The washing machines hummed around us like mechanical prayers, but all I could hear was the sound of my world collapsing. Leonard hadn't just stolen money and land. He'd murdered our father's trust, betrayed everything our family stood for, and now he was back to collect the final prize. But there was more in that folder. Email exchanges between Clarissa and someone at the FBI. Bank routing numbers for offshore accounts. Names I recognized from the news, politicians, judges, business leaders. This wasn't just about family property anymore. Leonard's crimes had tentacles reaching into the highest levels of power in Georgia. And my wife had gathered evidence that could bring them all down. I was still staring at those email exchanges when the laundromat door chimed. 2 men in dark suits walked in, moving with the kind of confidence that comes from carrying badges and guns. The elderly woman folding towels took one look at them and hurried out the back exit. We were alone. I slammed the laptop shut and pulled Evan close to me, but there was nowhere to run. The men positioned themselves between us and both exits, their movements coordinated like they'd done this before. The taller one, a white man with gray temples and cold eyes, approached our table. He held up a leather wallet, flashing a gold badge so quickly I could barely read it. "Mr. Calhoun, I'm Agent Morrison, FBI. We need to talk." FBI. Not Leonard's hired muscle. Federal agents. My confusion must have shown on my face because Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You look surprised. Did you think those files your wife collected would stay secret forever?" He knew about Clarissa. Knew about the flash drive. My protective instincts kicked into overdrive as I shifted Evan behind me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Morrison's partner, a younger black man with a scar across his left cheek, laughed. "Come on, Otis. Can I call you Otis? We've been watching your family for months. Ever since your wife started reaching out to FBI field offices, claiming she had evidence of government corruption." The room felt like it was spinning. Clarissa had contacted the FBI. She'd been trying to expose Leonard's crimes through official channels, trying to do the right thing. "Your wife made a mistake," Morrison continued, pulling up a chair like we were having a friendly conversation. "She thought the Bureau would be interested in justice. But some secrets are worth more than justice." He leaned forward, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Fear maybe, or desperation. "You see, your brother Leonard wasn't just stealing family land. He was laundering money for some very important people. Senators, federal judges, Pentagon officials. The kind of people who don't appreciate having their business arrangements exposed." My heart hammered against my ribs. The files on that flash drive weren't just evidence of Leonard's crimes. They were proof of corruption that reached the highest levels of government. "We know you have the drive," Morrison said. "Your grandson's been carrying it around in that little backpack for weeks. Very touching, really. An old woman trying to protect her family by turning her grandson into a courier." Evan pressed closer against my back, and I felt his small body trembling. These men had been watching us, studying us, learning our routines like we were suspects in some investigation. "Here's the thing, Otis," Morrison continued. "We're not here to arrest you. We're not here to protect you either." His smile turned arctic. "We're here to make sure that drive never sees daylight." The words hit me like a physical blow. The FBI wasn't here to investigate corruption. They were here to cover it up. The people your brother worked for, they have resources you can't imagine. Connections that reach into every government agency, every courthouse, every police department in Georgia. Morrison stood up, straightening his tie. "Your wife thought she was being clever, gathering evidence, building a case. What she was really doing was signing death warrants. I thought about Clarissa, somewhere over Tennessee, believing she was safe at a church retreat. Had these agents already reached her? Was my wife lying in a ditch somewhere because she tried to do the right thing? Where is she?" I managed to ask through clenched teeth. Morrison exchanged a look with his partner. "Your wife is currently enjoying the fellowship of her church friends in Memphis. As long as that drive finds its way back to us, she'll continue enjoying it." If you've ever wondered how deep corruption can reach into the system that's supposed to protect us, subscribe now because this story proves some truths are too dangerous for most people to handle. The threat was crystal clear. Cooperate or Clarissa dies. Hand over the evidence or lose everything that mattered to me. But something in Morrison's eyes told me they had no intention of letting any of us live, regardless of what I did. We'd seen too much, knew too much. Even if I gave them the drive, even if I stayed silent, there would always be the risk that someday Evan might remember what he'd heard and seen. "You have until midnight," Morrison said, checking his watch. "Marina Inn on Highway 78. Room 237. Come alone, bring the drive, and maybe your wife makes it home from her retreat." They walked out as casually as they'd entered, leaving me alone with Evan and the crushing realization that we weren't just running from Leonard anymore. We were caught between two forces blood, and government. My brother wanted us dead for money. The FBI wanted us dead for secrets. Either way, we were dead. I grabbed Evan's hand and we ran. Not toward my car, those agents would be watching it, but toward the back of the laundromat where a delivery truck was unloading industrial washing machines. The driver, a heavy-set man in coveralls, looked up as we approached. "You folks okay?" he asked, taking in our panicked faces. "Car trouble," I lied smoothly. "Any chance you could give us a ride to the bus station?" 20 minutes later, we were on a Greyhound headed south toward Savannah. I'd paid cash for 2 tickets, and we sat in the back where I could watch every passenger who got on or off. Evan curled up against my side as the Georgia countryside rolled past the windows. By midnight, we were driving through small towns that looked like they'd been forgotten by time. Peach stands and gas stations with hand-painted signs, the kind of places where strangers stood out and people minded their own business. But even here, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching us. I pulled out my phone and tried calling Clarissa. Straight to voicemail, just like the last 5 times I'd tried. Either she'd turned off her phone for the retreat, or something had already happened to her in Memphis. "The customer you are trying to reach is not available," the automated voice said for the 6th time. Panic clawed at my chest. Morrison's words echoed in my mind. "Your wife is currently enjoying the fellowship of her church friends in Memphis. As long as that drive finds its way back to us, she'll continue enjoying it." They had her. I knew it in my bones, the same way I'd known when patrols were walking into ambushes in Vietnam. Clarissa was in danger, and every mile we put between ourselves and that midnight deadline at the marina was another step toward losing her forever. "Grandpa," Evan mumbled, half asleep against my shoulder. "Grandma said they'd try to take her too." My blood went cold. "What did you say?" Evan's eyes fluttered open, confused by sleep and stress. "She told me weeks ago. Said if the bad men came looking for the secrets, they might try to hurt her to make you give them what they wanted." More pieces falling into place. Clarissa hadn't just known this day was coming, she'd planned for it. The church retreat in Memphis was supposed to keep her safe while Evan and I dealt with whatever Leonard had set in motion. But it hadn't worked. Either Leonard or the FBI had figured out her strategy and moved faster than she'd expected. "Did she tell you anything else?" I asked gently. Evan nodded, his small face serious. "She said if something happened to her, if we couldn't reach her by phone, we should follow the river. Said her daddy taught her things about hiding when the world got dangerous." Follow the river. Clarissa's father had worked the docks in Savannah back in the 1940s, when black men couldn't trust banks with their money, couldn't trust police with their problems, couldn't trust anybody but family and fellow dock workers. He'd told stories about hiding cash in warehouses, about secret meetings in places where white folks didn't go, about networks of people who helped each other survive when the system was designed to destroy them. "The river means Savannah," I said, more to myself than to Evan. "Grandma said her daddy knew places where money could hide from bad people. Places where the old families kept their secrets safe." Evan yawned, fighting sleep. "She said if we ever needed help, really needed help, we should go where the river meets the sea." Dawn was breaking over Savannah when our bus finally pulled into the station. The air smelled like salt and history, like old money and older secrets. The Savannah River stretched out before us, its muddy waters reflecting the pink and gold of sunrise. I thought about Clarissa's father, loading ships in this very port 70 years ago, hiding his wages from banks that wouldn't serve black customers, building networks of trust that survived generations. Had he hidden more than money down here? Had he left behind resources that his daughter could tap into when her family faced destruction? As we walked toward the riverfront, passing warehouses and shipping containers that looked like they'd been there since before I was born, one question burned in my mind. Was the truth we were carrying older than Leonard, older than the FBI's corruption, older than any of us had imagined? The Savannah riverfront was waking up when we reached Bay Street. Shrimp boats headed out for their morning catch, their diesel engines coughing black smoke into the humid air. Tourists wouldn't arrive for hours, leaving the docks to the people who actually worked them, mostly black men whose grandfathers had loaded cotton and whose fathers had loaded containers. I found a bench facing the water and sat down with Evan, trying to figure out our next move. The flash drive felt like it was burning a hole in my shirt pocket. Every person who walked past could be an agent. Every car that slowed down could be Leonard's people. That's when she approached us. An elderly black woman, maybe 70, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that reminded me powerfully of someone I couldn't place. She wore a simple blue dress and carried herself with the kind of dignity that comes from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. "You're Roosevelt's boy," she said, settling onto the bench beside us without invitation. Got his stubborn jaw and his worried eyes. My father. She'd known my father. I studied her face, searching for recognition, but came up empty. "Do we know each other, ma'am?" I asked politely. She smiled, and suddenly I could see past the decades of lines and gray hair to the young woman she'd once been. The resemblance hit me like lightning. "You know my cousin Clarissa," she said simply. "I'm Ruby. Ruby Washington now, but I was Ruby Henderson when we were girls in Birmingham." Ruby Henderson, Clarissa's cousin who'd supposedly died in a house fire in 1973. The family had mourned her for 50 years. Clarissa still kept her picture on our mantle back home. "You died," I said stupidly. "The fire." Clarissa said they never found your body, but... "They never found my body because I wasn't in it," Ruby replied matter-of-factly. "Had to disappear that night. Federal agents were coming for me in the morning, said I knew too much about certain people's business arrangements down here in Georgia." She glanced at Evan, who was staring at her with wide eyes, then back at me. Clarissa knew I was alive. Been in touch with her for years, helping her keep track of certain family members who should have stayed lost. "Leonard." She was talking about Leonard. "Your brother came sniffing around Savannah 6 months ago," Ruby continued, watching a pelican dive for fish in the river. "Started asking old doc families about property records, bank accounts, safe deposit boxes. Places where black folks used to hide things when banks wouldn't serve us." The pieces were falling into place. Leonard hadn't just stolen our family land. He'd been hunting for other hidden assets, other families' buried treasures from the days when black Americans had to hide their wealth to protect it. "But Leonard made a mistake," Ruby said, turning to face me directly. "He thought he was just hunting family money. What he was actually hunting was government money. Money that certain federal agents had been skimming for decades and hiding in those same old family accounts." My stomach dropped. Government money? Cocaine task force funds from the 80s. Hurricane relief money from the 90s. Homeland Security budgets from after September 11th. Ruby's voice was quiet but steady. Corrupt agents had been using old black family networks to launder federal money for 20 years. Your brother stumbled into their operation when he started digging up our family's financial history. The implications crashed over me like a tide. Leonard wasn't just a thief. He was a threat to federal agents who'd been stealing millions in government funds and hiding it in accounts belonging to families like ours. "Half the agents chasing you now aren't chasing justice," Ruby continued. "They're chasing their retirement plans. That flash drive your wife collected doesn't just prove Leonard's crimes. It proves their crimes too." She reached into her purse and pulled out an old brass key, the kind that might open a safe deposit box or storage locker. Clarissa knew this day would come. She's been preparing for it longer than you know. I took the key with trembling fingers. "Where is she? Is she safe?" Ruby's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "Your wife is a lot smarter than those FBI agents gave her credit for. That church retreat in Memphis? That was never the real plan." She stood up, smoothing her dress. "There's a storage locker at the old Greyhound station on West Broad Street. Number 127. What you find inside will tell you where Clarissa really went and what she expects you to do next." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Is she alive?" Ruby paused, looking out at the river where her ancestors had worked and hidden and survived. Clarissa's playing a game those federal agents don't even know they're in. Question is whether she's 3 moves ahead of them or whether she miscalculated how fast they'd come for her family. She started walking away, then turned back one final time. One more thing, Otis. Your wife didn't just marry you for love. She married you because Roosevelt's boy would have the strength to finish what she started. Was my wife alive and working in shadows? Or had she prepared for her own disappearance? The old Greyhound station on West Broad Street looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint since the Carter administration. Half the windows were boarded up, and weeds grew through cracks in the sidewalk. But the storage lockers in the basement were still operational, protected by rusty metal doors and combination locks that had been turning for decades. Locker 127 was tucked in a corner where the fluorescent lights barely reached. The brass key Ruby had given me fit perfectly, but my hands shook so badly I could barely turn it. Inside was a battered leather journal, the kind Clarissa used to write down her favorite Bible verses and grocery lists. But when I opened to the first page, the handwriting that greeted me wasn't about Sunday dinner or prayer meetings. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't escape. My vision blurred. The words swam on the page like they were written in water instead of ink. Evan pressed close against my side, his small hand gripping my sleeve as I continued reading. Otis, my beloved husband, I've been keeping secrets from you for 25 years. Not because I didn't trust you, but because knowing would have put you in danger long before we were ready to fight back. I sank onto a wooden crate someone had left in the storage area, using it as a makeshift chair while my world collapsed around me. The journal trembled in my hands as I turned page after page of my wife's careful documentation. The betrayals she'd uncovered went back to the 1960s. Family members who had traded information about civil rights organizers to FBI agents in exchange for protection and money. Church deacons who had sold out their own congregations to federal infiltrators. Community leaders who had taken government bribes to keep their neighbors from voting. Our family hadn't just been victims of Leonard's greed. We'd been casualties in a war that had been raging for generations, a war between people who believed in justice and people who sold justice to the highest bidder. Your grandfather didn't just leave us land, Clarissa had written. He left us names. Lists of families who could be trusted and families who couldn't. People who had stood up to federal pressure and people who had cracked under it. She'd been using those lists for decades, building networks of families who had kept their integrity, who had refused to sell out their communities even when it meant poverty or persecution. That's how she'd gathered so much evidence about Leonard's crimes. That's how she'd learned about the corrupt federal agents who had been using black family networks to launder government money. The flash drive Evan carries is just the beginning, she'd written. The real evidence is hidden in places they'd never think to look. Church basements, family Bibles, courthouse records filed under names that don't exist anymore. Our ancestors knew how to hide truth from people who wanted to bury it. Have you ever discovered that your family's history wasn't what you thought it was? That the people you trusted most had been keeping secrets that could destroy or save you? Comment below if you've ever had to question everything you believed about your own blood. I turned another page and found a hand-drawn map of Savannah with locations marked in red ink. Storage units, safe deposit boxes, even graves in old cemeteries where documents had been hidden in waterproof containers. Clarissa had spent decades building a treasure hunt that would expose corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. But the final entry in the journal, dated just 2 weeks ago, made my blood run cold. They know I've been gathering evidence. Leonard contacted me through intermediaries, claiming he wants to make amends, but I can see the trap he's laying. The federal agents are getting desperate too. They've started watching the house, following me to the grocery store, recording my phone calls. My throat constricted as I read her final words. If something happens to me, if I don't make it back from Memphis, Otis needs to know that I went there willingly. Not for a church retreat, but to meet with a journalist who promised to publish everything. I'm trading my safety for the chance to expose them all. Tell Evan his grandmother loves him more than life itself, and tell my husband that some fights are worth dying for." The journal slipped from my numb fingers and hit the concrete floor with a sound like a gunshot. Footsteps echoed through the station above us, heavy and purposeful, growing closer to the basement stairs. The footsteps on the stairs weren't hurried or cautious. They moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going and what they'd find when they got there. I shoved Clarissa's journal inside my jacket and pulled Evan behind one of the larger storage lockers, pressing my finger to my lips. Through the gaps between metal doors, I could see the stairwell entrance. My heart hammered so loud I was sure whoever was coming would hear it echoing off the concrete walls. A shadow stretched across the basement floor as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Then a figure stepped into the dim light cast by the overhead bulbs. I recognized him immediately, even though 20 years had changed him. The same lanky build, the same way of holding his shoulders like he owned whatever room he entered. But Leonard's hair was completely gray now, and deep lines carved his face into a map of decades spent looking over his shoulder. He wore an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the gun bulge under his left armpit. His shoes were polished leather that had never seen honest work. Even after all these years, after all the destruction he'd caused, Leonard still carried himself like a man who expected the world to bend to his will. "I know you're here, Otis," he called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Saw you and the boy walk in 20 minutes ago. Been waiting outside for you to find what Clarissa left behind." I stayed silent, but Evan's small hand gripped my sleeve so tight I could feel his fingernails through the fabric. My brother had been watching us. While we'd been reading Clarissa's journal, learning about decades of betrayal and corruption, Leonard had been circling us like a vulture waiting for roadkill to stop moving. "Come on out, little brother," Leonard continued, walking slowly between the storage lockers. "We need to talk. Family business, you understand? Family business." The words tasted like poison in my mouth. This man had stolen our father's legacy, betrayed everything our grandfather had built, turned our family name into something shameful. And he had the nerve to call it family business. "I found some interesting reading material in locker 127, Leonard said, stopping directly in front of our hiding spot. Clarissa always was too smart for her own good. Writing down names, dates, bank account numbers. Building herself a little insurance policy in case anyone ever came looking for what she knew." He paused, and I could hear him breathing just on the other side of the metal door. "Problem is, insurance policies only work if you're alive to cash them in." The threat was clear. Leonard knew about the journal, knew about the evidence Clarissa had hidden throughout Savannah, knew about the network of families she'd been working with to expose the corruption. And he was here to make sure none of it ever saw daylight. "Now I'm going to count to 3, Leonard said, his voice taking on the same tone he'd used to terrorize me when we were children. "If you don't come out, I'm going to start making phone calls. First call goes to my friends at the FBI, telling them exactly where to find Roosevelt Calhoun's surviving son. Second call goes to some associates in Memphis who are currently enjoying Clarissa's hospitality." Memphis. Clarissa. My knees nearly buckled as the implication hit me. Leonard had her. The woman who'd spent 25 years gathering evidence to expose him was now his prisoner. 3. I stepped out from behind the storage locker, my hands raised but my body positioned between Leonard and Evan. Whatever happened next, my grandson wouldn't be hurt. Not while I still had breath in my body. Leonard smiled when he saw me, the same cold expression he'd worn at our father's funeral while he was secretly planning to rob us blind. "There's my little brother," he said, still trying to play hero after all these years. But it was Evan's voice that cut through the tension like a knife, small and shocked and heartbroken. "Grandpa, that's Uncle Leonard." The man who had destroyed our family for money now stood between us and escape. Leonard holstered his gun when he saw Evan step out from behind me. Even after 20 years of running from the law, my brother apparently drew the line at threatening children in front of witnesses. Or maybe he just needed us alive long enough to get what he wanted. Easy, Otis, he said, raising his hands in a gesture that was supposed to look peaceful. I'm not here to hurt you or the boy. Then why the gun? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my chest. Leonard glanced around the basement storage area, checking shadows and corners like he expected federal agents to come pouring down the stairs at any moment. Because the people hunting us don't make distinctions between targets and collateral damage. Like we were all on the same side. Like he hadn't spent 20 years destroying everything our family had built. You stole our father's land, I said. Forged documents, created fake companies, left us with nothing. And now you want me to believe you're trying to protect us. Leonard's laugh was bitter and tired. You think I wanted any of this? You think I chose to spend 20 years hiding in Central America, jumping at every car backfire, sleeping with one eye open? He moved closer, and I could see desperation in his eyes that hadn't been there when we were young. Whatever games Leonard had been playing, they'd taken a toll that success couldn't erase. The money I took wasn't just family money, Otis. It was government money. CIA black budget funds that had been hidden in black family accounts since the 1970s. His voice dropped to a whisper. They were using our communities as cover for operations that Congress never approved, wars that didn't officially exist. My stomach twisted. The corruption went deeper than family theft. It reached into the intelligence agencies that were supposed to protect American citizens. When I started digging into Daddy's accounts after he died, I found deposits that didn't make sense. Payments from shell companies that led back to Langley. Our family had been chosen as unwitting partners in operations that would have ended up on the front page if anyone had connected the dots. Leonard ran his hand through his gray hair, looking every one of his 70 years. So I took it all. Every dollar they'd hidden in our accounts, every property they'd used as a front. Figured if they wanted to use black families as cover, they could pay the price for it. The pieces were falling into place, but they formed a picture I didn't want to see. That's why the FBI agents want us dead. We're not just witnesses to your crimes. We're witnesses to theirs. 25 years of illegal arms deals, drug money laundering, assassination funding, Leonard confirmed. All hidden in accounts belonging to families like ours, families they figured nobody would believe or investigate. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text message. Target acquired. Memphis location confirmed. Await instructions. My blood went ice cold. Clarissa. She contacted me 6 weeks ago, Leonard said. Told me she'd been gathering evidence about the government accounts, about the corruption. Said she had proof that would bring down senators, judges, CIA directors. I thought about my wife's journal, about the network of families she'd been working with, about the storage locations marked on her hand-drawn map. She'd been building a case that could expose decades of federal crimes. She knew they'd come for you and the boy, Leonard continued. That's why she arranged the church retreat. She thought if she could meet with journalists in Memphis, get the story published before they realized what was happening, you'd be safe. My knees nearly buckled. They have her. The message came through this morning. Coded but clear enough. They grabbed her at the hotel in Memphis before she could meet with the reporters. Leonard's voice was hollow. She's alive, but they're using her as leverage to get the evidence back. Evan tugged at my sleeve. Grandpa, is Grandma in trouble? I knelt down to his level, trying to find words that would be honest without terrifying him. Some bad people have Grandma, but we're going to get her back. Leonard crouched beside us. The boy's been carrying more than just a flash drive, hasn't he? Clarissa would have given him something else, something they can't trace electronically. I thought about the brass key Ruby had given us, about the storage locations marked in Clarissa's journal. My wife had been planning this for months, maybe years. She'd known that someday Leonard would surface, that the corruption would catch up with all of us. She left instructions, I admitted. Locations where she hid evidence. Names of families who can be trusted. Leonard nodded grimly. Then we have something to trade. The question is whether we can trust the people we're trading with to keep their word. He stood up, checking his phone again. They want to meet tonight. Midnight. Fort Pulaski, out on Cockspur Island. Isolated, controllable, easy to make people disappear if the deal goes wrong. But if Leonard was telling the truth, then where was Clarissa? Leonard checked his phone again, his face grim in the fluorescent light. Fort Pulaski isn't just the meeting location. It's where they're holding her. The old Civil War fort sat on an island 20 minutes from downtown Savannah, surrounded by salt marshes and accessible only by a single causeway. If the FBI wanted an isolated location for an exchange, they couldn't have picked better. How do you know she's there? I asked. Leonard showed me another text message. Package secure at historical location. Bring merchandise for inspection at 2,400 hours. Package. They were talking about my wife like she was cargo to be shipped and delivered. There's something else, Leonard said, his voice dropping even lower. Clarissa didn't just stumble into this situation. She's been planning it for months. My blood chilled. What do you mean? The church retreat in Memphis was never real. She contacted those journalists weeks ago, told them exactly when and where to expect her. She knew the FBI would intercept her, knew they'd use her as bait to draw us into the open. The implications hit me like a physical blow. My gentle, church-going wife had deliberately walked into enemy hands. She'd orchestrated her own capture as part of some larger strategy one couldn't begin to understand. Why would she do that? I whispered. Leonard pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet. It showed him and Clarissa standing together outside a government building, both looking much younger. Your wife contacted me 6 months ago. Said she'd been tracking the corruption for years, building evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. The photograph was dated 18 months ago. Clarissa had been secretly meeting with Leonard for over a year, planning whatever was about to happen. She knew they'd never let her publish the evidence without trying to silence her first. So she made herself the bait. Let them think they'd captured their biggest threat while the real operation happened somewhere else. Evan pulled at my sleeve. Grandpa, what's an operation? Leonard knelt down to Evan's level, his expression softer than I'd seen it since we were children. Your grandmother is very smart, son. She's playing a game where she lets the bad guys think they're winning while she gets ready to surprise them. I stared at my brother, trying to process this new reality. So the midnight meeting is a trap, Leonard finished. But not for us. For them. While they're focused on the exchange at Fort Pulaski, other people Clarissa's been working with will be releasing everything to news organizations across the country. He stood up, checking his gun and pulling car keys from his pocket. But there's a problem. If we don't show up at midnight, if they don't get the flash drive and journal, they'll kill her before the story breaks. Clarissa's plan only works if we play our parts perfectly. The weight of understanding settled on my shoulders like lead. My wife had turned herself into a chess piece in a game where one wrong move would cost her life. We need to move, Leonard said, heading toward the stairs. There's an old maintenance tunnel system under the historic district. We can get close to the fort without using the main causeway. But rescuing Clarissa meant walking into a trap designed for us. The underground rail tunnels beneath Savannah stretched out like the ribs of some massive buried creature. Leonard led us through passages that hadn't seen daylight since the 1940s, when they'd been used to move cargo from the docks to warehouses without interference from customs officials or prying eyes. Our footsteps echoed off wet brick walls as we moved deeper into the city's hidden anatomy. Leonard carried a flashlight that cast dancing shadows ahead of us, making the tunnel seem alive and breathing. Government Safe House is in the old Consolidated Cotton Warehouse on River Street, Leonard said, his voice bouncing off the walls. Built in 1887, perfect for their purposes. Multiple floors, basement levels that don't appear on any city plans, access points they can control. I kept one hand on Evan's shoulder as we walked, feeling his small body trembling with cold and fear. But when Leonard stopped to check his phone, my grandson surprised me. I want to help, Evan said, his voice steady despite everything we'd been through. Grandma's in trouble because of something I was carrying. I should help get her back. Leonard and I exchanged glances. The boy was 7 years old, traumatized by days of running and hiding, but his jaw was set with determination that reminded me powerfully of his father. What did you have in mind, son? Leonard asked gently. Kids can go places adults can't, Evan said. People don't pay attention to kids, especially black kids. I could get close to the building, see how many guards they have, find another way in. The suggestion sent ice through my veins. Absolutely not. You're staying with me where it's safe. But Leonard was nodding thoughtfully. The boy's right. 3 different government factions are fighting over this evidence. FBI, CIA, and some Pentagon Black Ops unit that technically doesn't exist. They'll be watching for adult threats, not children. He pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid. Wireless communication. Range of about half a mile. Evan could scout the perimeter while we position ourselves for entry. My protective instincts screamed against putting my grandson in more danger, but the tactical part of my brain recognized the logic. We needed intelligence about what we were walking into. Clarissa planned for this, Leonard continued. She knew that eventually you and Evan would have to work together to finish what she started. That's why she gave him the flash drive instead of hiding it somewhere safe. She was training him. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. My wife hadn't just been protecting evidence. She'd been preparing our grandson for exactly this moment, when 3 generations of our family would have to unite against forces bigger than any of us. She knew I'd come back, Leonard said quietly. Knew that when the truth finally came out, we'd need each other to survive what came next. Evan looked up at me with eyes too old for his young face. I want to help save Grandma. Please, Grandpa. Above us, through grates in the tunnel ceiling, I could hear the sounds of downtown Savannah settling into evening. Normal people going about normal lives while we prepared to storm a fortress with nothing but rage and determination. We were about to storm a fortress with nothing but rage and determination. The consolidated cotton warehouse loomed against the Savannah night sky like a monument to forgotten commerce. Leonard cut the chain-link fence behind the building while I kept watch, and Evan monitored the radio chatter through his earpiece. 3 vehicles out front, Evan whispered into his communicator. Black SUVs with government plates. I count at least 6 agents on the ground floor. We slipped through the fence and moved along the building's eastern wall, staying in shadows cast by loading docks that hadn't seen trucks in decades. The warehouse windows were too dirty to see through, but light leaked around the edges of boards nailed over broken panes. Leonard found a service entrance near the back corner, its lock broken years ago by urban explorers or homeless people seeking shelter. The door opened onto a stairwell that reeked of rust and rotted wood. We climbed toward voices echoing from the 3rd floor, our footsteps masked by the constant creaking of old timber settling under its own weight. Through gaps in the floorboards above us, I could see movement and hear conversation. What I heard made my blood freeze. The price just went up, Clarissa's voice said, clear and commanding. Senators Carlisle and Morrison are named in 17 different financial transfers. Judge Patterson approved warrants based on falsified evidence. This goes all the way to the Pentagon. My wife wasn't pleading for her life. She was negotiating. You're not in a position to make demands, another voice replied, Agent Morrison from the laundromat. We have you, we have the location of your family, and we have enough firepower to solve this problem permanently. No, Agent Morrison, you have a problem, Clarissa said. In 47 minutes, every major news organization in the country receives a data dump that will end careers and start congressional investigations. The only way to stop that transmission is with a code that only I know. Leonard and I crept closer to a hole in the ceiling where we could see into the main warehouse space. Clarissa sat in a metal chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back, surrounded by at least 8 federal agents. But she looked calm, almost serene, like she was conducting a business meeting instead of fighting for her life. The evidence is already distributed, she continued, hidden in locations your people will never find. The only question is whether you want to be arrested next week or next month. Morrison's face was red with fury. We could make you disappear tonight. Dump your body in the Savannah River. No one would ever find you. Clarissa smiled. Go ahead. Try explaining to your superiors why a 70-year-old church lady outsmarted the entire intelligence community. That's when Leonard's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The ringtone echoed through the warehouse like a fire alarm. Every agent spun toward the sound, weapons drawn. Flashlight beams swept the ceiling, searching for the source of the noise. Contact! Morrison shouted. We have movement in the building. Gunfire erupted as agents opened fire on our position. Leonard tackled me to the floor as bullets shattered windows and splintered wooden beams around us. Bullets shattered windows as we realized we were outnumbered 10-1. Gunfire tore through the warehouse as Leonard and I crawled behind a concrete support pillar. Bullets ricocheted off metal beams and shattered glass, filling the air with deadly fragments. Cease fire. Clarissa's voice cut through the chaos. You idiots just triggered the dead man switch. The shooting stopped instantly. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heart hammering and Evan's frightened breathing through the radio earpiece. What dead man switch? Morrison demanded. Clarissa's laugh echoed through the warehouse. The one connected to my pulse monitor. If my heart rate drops below 40 beats per minute or exceeds 180 for more than 30 seconds, every file in my network uploads automatically to 63 news organizations worldwide. I peered around the pillar and saw agents checking their phones frantically. Morrison was barking orders into his radio, trying to confirm whether any data transmissions had been triggered. Your gunfight just spiked my heart rate to 170, Clarissa continued calmly. You have maybe 8 minutes before the uploads begin. After that, every senator, judge, and agency director in those files becomes unemployed and possibly imprisoned. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The hunters had become the hunted. Leonard crawled beside me, blood seeping from his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. She's been planning this for months, he whispered, recording every conversation, documenting every threat, building an unbreakable case. Morrison's voice cracked with desperation. Call it off. Stop the transmission. I can't, Clarissa replied. Once activated, only 2 people can input the cancellation code. Me and someone who isn't in this warehouse. She was buying us time, but we were still trapped. 8 agents with automatic weapons stood between us and the exit. That's when Leonard made his choice. Cover me, he said, pulling out his pistol. When I draw their fire, get to that stairwell and take Evan home. Before I could stop him, Leonard burst from cover, firing at the agents while running toward the opposite end of the warehouse. His sacrifice was immediate and devastating, drawing their attention away from our position while bullets found their mark. When families face impossible choices, when everything you've ever loved hangs in the balance, you discover what really matters. Some people choose themselves. Others choose their blood. Which kind of person are you? Drop a comment and tell me how far you'd go to protect the people who matter most. Leonard's body hit the concrete floor with a sound that would haunt me forever, but his sacrifice had created the opening we needed. I sprinted toward the stairwell as agents rushed to check on their fallen targets. The uploads have been canceled, Clarissa announced as I reached the stairs. But the recordings of this entire operation are already in federal court. Every threat you made, every illegal order you gave, it's all documented evidence. Morrison's face went white. You've been recording us? For 6 months, Clarissa said. Every phone call, every meeting, every federal crime you committed while hunting my family. Your careers ended the moment you decided to threaten innocent people. As Leonard's blood pooled on concrete, everything changed. 2 years later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house in Stone Mountain, watching Evan help Clarissa make her famous peach cobbler. The boy was 9 now, taller and stronger, with no trace of the fear that had gripped him that day at the airport. He laughed at something his grandmother said, flour dusting his dark hands as he mixed the topping. The trials had lasted 8 months. Agent Morrison got 25 years for conspiracy and murder. 6 other federal agents received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. Senator Carlisle resigned in disgrace before facing charges. Judge Patterson was disbarred and sentenced to 15 years for accepting bribes and falsifying warrants. The story had dominated headlines for weeks. Church lady brings down federal corruption ring, read one newspaper. Grandmother's evidence exposes decades of government crime, said another. Clarissa had testified before 3 congressional committees, her calm voice describing years of careful investigation while cameras broadcast her words across the nation. We'd used the settlement money from our wrongful pursuit lawsuit to buy a larger house with a garden where Clarissa could grow tomatoes and Evan could play safely. The boy had adjusted better than any of us expected, though he still slept with his bedroom door open and checked the locks twice before bed. Leonard was buried in our family plot beside our father, his name finally cleared of federal charges. The headstone read, Leonard Calhoun, brother, uncle, patriot. Clarissa had insisted on that last word, saying his final sacrifice had saved our family and exposed corruption that might have continued for decades. Ruby Washington had surfaced from 50 years of hiding to testify at the trials, her presence shocking former FBI agents who thought they'd eliminated all witnesses to their crimes. She now lived openly in Savannah, working with civil rights organizations to document other cases of government infiltration into Black communities. Clarissa's book, Hidden in Plain Sight, How One Family Exposed Federal Corruption, had become a bestseller. She donated all proceeds to organizations fighting government overreach and supporting families torn apart by federal misconduct. The flash drive that had started our nightmare now sat in the Smithsonian Institution, part of an exhibit about citizen whistleblowers who'd risked everything to expose the truth. Grandpa, cobbler's ready, Evan called from the kitchen. I joined my family at the dinner table, looking at faces I'd almost lost, breathing air I'd feared we'd never share again. Clarissa reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her wedding ring catching light from the window. What are you thinking about? She asked softly. How lucky we are, I said. How many families don't make it through what we survived? Outside, children played in yards protected by laws and watched by neighbors who cared about their safety. Inside, 3 generations sat together, marked by struggle but strengthened by love. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought by ordinary people who refuse to give up. We learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about who stands with you when everything falls apart. And in the end, truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deep they try to bury it.